Chapter 4. Take responsibility for the face of the world. The symbols of today enable the reality of tomorrow. Notice the swastikas and the other signs of hate. Do not look away and do not get used to them. Remove them yourself and set an example for others to do so. Life is political, not because the world cares about how you feel, but because the world reacts to what you do. The minor choices we make are themselves a kind of vote, making it more or less likely that a free and fair election will be held in the future. In the politics of the everyday, our words and gestures, or their absence, count very much. A few extreme examples, and less extreme examples from the 20th century can show us how. In the Soviet Union, under the rule of Joseph Stalin, preposterous farmers were portrayed on propaganda posters as pigs, a dehumanization that in rural settings clearly suggested slaughter. This was in the early 1930s, as the Soviet state tried to master the countryside and extract capital for its crash industrialization. The peasants who had more land or livestock than the others were the first to lose what they had. A neighbour portrayed as a pig is someone whose land you can take. But those who followed this symbolic logic became victims in their turn. Having turned the poorer peasant against the richer, the Soviet powers then seized everyone's land for new collective farms. Collectivization had completely brought starvation to much of Soviet peasantry. Millions of people in the Soviet Ukraine, Soviet Kazakhstan, and Soviet Russia died horrible, humiliating deaths between 1930 and 1933. Before it was over, the Soviet citizens were butchering corpses for human meat. In 1933, as the starvation in the USSR reached its height, the Nazi Party came to power in Germany. In the euphoria of victory, the Nazis tried to organise boycotts of Jewish shops. This was not very successful at first, but the practice of marking one firm as Jewish and another as Aryan, with paint on windows or walls, did affect the way Germans thought about household economics. A shop marked Jewish had no future. It became an object of covetous plans. As property was marked as ethnic, envy transformed ethics. If shops could be Jewish, what about other companies and properties? The wish that Jews might disappear, perhaps suppressed at first, rose as it was levied by greed. Thus, Germans who marked shops as Jewish participated in the process by which Jews really did disappear, as did people who simply looked on. Accepting the marking as natural part of urban landscape was already a compromise with murderous futures. You might one day be offered the opportunity to display symbols of loyalty. Make sure that such symbols include your fellow citizens rather than exclude them. Even the history of Lapin pins is far from innocent. In Nazi Germany in 1933, people who wore Lapin pins that said yes during the elections and referendum that confirmed the one-party state. In 1938 in Austria, people who not previously been Nazis began to wear swastika pins. What might seem like a gesture of pride can be a source of exclusion. In the Europe of the 1930s and 1940s, people chose to wear swastikas, and then others had to wear yellow stars. The late history of communism, when no one believed in revolution anymore, offers a final lesson about symbols. Even when the citizens, demoralised and wish only to be left alone, public markers can still sustain a tyrannical regime. When the Czechoslovak communists won the election in 1946 and proceeded to claim full power after a coup in 1948, many Czechoslovak citizens were euphoric. When the dissident thinker Václav Havel wrote The Power of the Powerless 3 decades later in 1978, he was explaining the continuity of an oppressive regime in whose goals and ideology few people still believed. He offered a parable of greengrocers who place a sign writing "Workers of the World Unite" in the shop window. It is not that the man actually endorses the content of the quotation from the Communist Manifesto. He places the sign in the window so that he can withdraw into daily life without trouble from the authorities. When everyone else follows the same logic, the public sphere is covered with a sign of loyalty, and resistance becomes unthinkable. As Havel put it, "We have seen that the real meaning of Greengrocer's slogan has nothing to do with what the text of the slogan actually says. Even so, the real meaning is quite clear and generally comprehensible because the code is so familiar. The greengrocer declares his loyalty in the only way that the regime is capable of hearing. That is, by accepting the prescribed ritual, by accepting appearances as reality, by accepting the given rules of the game, thus making it possible for the game to go on, for it to exist in the first place." "And what happens," asked Havel, "if no one plays the game?"